Next up is opportunities and challenges to protect and improve groundwater quality in Northeast Nebraska. So Brian Bruckner will be leading this presentation. He's a general manager for the Lower Elkhorn Natural Resources District here in Nebraska.
Thank you, Francis. I'm going to try it from here. Advance the slide by.
Just push the right.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. As Francis mentioned, Brian Bruckner, General Manager, Lower Elkhorn NRD up in northern Nebraska. So my presentation is going to be non-technical compared to the first two. I'm going to give you my testimonial as someone who's been approximately a 20-year practitioner when it comes to groundwater management here in Nebraska. By a show of hands, how many who are here in attendance are from outside of Nebraska? Quite a few. Okay. From those who raised their hands, how familiar are you with our water management structure in Nebraska? Somewhat. Okay. I'll dive in on that a little bit to expand your understanding of that. But at any rate, we've got lots of challenges here, just like other states do when it comes to water management. The bulk of my comments are going to focus on water quality. Okay, I'm not going to talk at all about water quantity. That could be a whole afternoon in itself. We've got water quality issues up in our neck of the woods. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, there are 23 natural resource districts delineated on river basin boundaries here in Nebraska. The natural resource districts are responsible for and have the authority to regulate groundwater. Surface water is managed and regulated by the state of Nebraska. You can see where we are on the map there. We're up in northeast Nebraska. As the crow flies, you get in the car and you go about 2 hours north and west of here. That's where we're at. We're a rural neighborhood. Largest community in our district is Norfolk, Nebraska. 26,000 plus population. We have lots of rural communities. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm a native of Northeast Nebraska, a lifelong resident. I grew up on a farm northeast of Osmond, which is kind of in the northwest corner of our district. Grew up there on a family farm, farmed for almost 20 years before coming to work for the Natural Resource District. So I'm a farm kid that was lucky enough to land on their feet and find a job, still working with natural resources. I feel very fortunate to be in the position that I am because we've got some real challenges and we've got some real needs. And once again, I feel fortunate to serve the people a lot of them that I know and grew up with. It's safe to assume that groundwater is the primary source of drinking water for residents in our district, as it is for many other residents in Nebraska. When it comes to our involvement with water quality, the districts were established in 1972, and shortly thereafter, programs were rolled out. When it came to monitoring groundwater quality, groundwater quantity, to manage those resources. We ramped things up in our district in the 1980s. And that monitoring, that sampling showed us that we had areas in our district where we had pockets of elevated nitrates in the groundwater, which is not at all uncharacteristic of many other agricultural areas. But and that wouldn't have been surprising given some of the issues that we're faced with, some of the variables. We are agricultural. Approximately a third of the land is groundwater irrigated. Corn, soybeans, and alfalfa are the primary crops. For those of you who have ever driven Highway 275 up to Norfolk, you know that there's livestock production in our neck of the woods, and that's ever expanding. Of all species, cow-calf, beef finishing, beef feedlots, swine production, poultry production, dairy, you name it, we've got it all. And as I said, the numbers continue to expand. And I think part of it is because we have water available. Other parts of the world don't have that, especially parts of Nebraska, parts of the United States don't have that water. And I think that's a drawing point for us. The soil types in our district are highly variable. We have clay soils, we have coarse textured sandy soils. Depths to groundwater are quite variable as well. We have locations where it's very shallow depth to groundwater, locations where it's much deeper. And, you know, those are variables that contribute to some of the issues that we're dealing with when it comes to water quality. When it comes to precipitation, our average precipitation up there is just shy of 30 inches, but it can be very variable. We have some very wet years and we have some very dry years. That variability lends itself to, you know, some of the water contamination issues that we have. This year is another one of those years where in June and July, the National Weather Service at their station in Norfolk reported over 14 inches of rain. In my lifetime, and I've talked to many people this summer who are, again, lifelong residents of Northeast Nebraska, never have we seen that kind of precipitation during the growing season. We were fortunate in that we came into the growing season quite deficit. So we've been able to store a lot of that water, take advantage of that water, that rainfall. We had some runoff, but really it wasn't significant, not to what a person might have thought it could have been. It was definitely a concern because we did have some precipitation events where there were, you know, 4 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches in localized areas. So when it comes to tackling this water quality issue, we're using a variety of tools, and none of these tools is solution. It takes all of these tools, and even using all these tools, we've still got a long way to go. As I mentioned, we have regulatory authority, and we have used it, as have many of the NRDs in Nebraska, implementing mechanisms in an attempt to remediate groundwater quality conditions. Some of them have had to deploy them for groundwater quantity issues. Us, not so much, but that authority is granted to us by the state of Nebraska. We have management plans. We have developed those in cooperation with the state of Nebraska. Those management plans outline management benchmarks for managing groundwater quality, groundwater quantity. We've also got a set of rules and regs, which is basically the implementation mechanism of that plan. That's where the rubber meets the road, and that's where the public can see, okay, if this condition is met, then they're going to do this. And unfortunately, when it comes to groundwater quality, we've had to do that. Those triggers utilize the maximum contaminant level per nitrate as established by the Environmental Protection Agency as the benchmark. So when it comes to groundwater and our addressing groundwater quality, we have to use that drinking water standards when we've set our triggers. So 10 parts per million is the trigger we have to observe. On the right-hand side of the slide is a map of our current management area. It's a phase 2 and 3 management area and encompasses a portion of Pierce and Madison counties. Boundaries have expanded since this was first established in 1996. Our monitoring efforts have shown, you know, other portions close by where the initial management area was established, where water quality parameters were concentrations of nitrates were such that we needed to do more. In this area, farm operators have to comply with a set of regulatory mechanisms. They have to do soil testing, water testing. We have a limit on the amount of nitrogen that they can apply in any single application. They have to spoon feed it. They have to apply it in multiple applications. You know, all of these are, I think, practices that are, you know, standard practices for most people. All of these things, hopefully over time, will demonstrate positive results when it comes to groundwater quality. For those of you who were in the session right after lunch, you know, the panel talking about the TAPS program, you know, some of the technologies that are out there, some of the things that are happening. You know, there's a lot of technologies and new practices that are coming in the landscape, and I think, you know, that can maybe help us out here along with these regulatory mechanisms. Along with the regulation, you know, we use education. We've always tried to inform and educate our constituents, our farm operators, in an attempt to, well, first of all, keep them in compliance. I think most people will recognize that, you know, they need to do their part. They recognize that they're part of the solution, while they may also be part of the problem. I tell people, kind of tongue in cheek, that, you know, maybe I'm part of the problem, because I farmed in Pierce County for almost 20 years. Maybe I contributed to this problem. I know I probably did. But my brother, who still operates the farm, does things differently than we did 20 and 25 years ago. And so, you know, hopefully that has a positive benefit. We have developed a website specifically to water quality. Public health there's a big focus on public health. And of course, there's the blue baby syndrome. You know, most of us are familiar with that, but there's a growing body of research that would connect nitrate and groundwater contaminants to other cancers, pediatric defects, things of that nature. That's very concerning, especially for me as someone who's a lifelong resident of the area and a practitioner in the area. You know, if there are other things that we need to be taking more seriously, that's important for us to know. We're going to have to address that. We have utilized the resources of the UNL to conduct field demonstrations. We do in-classroom experience, so on and so forth, just like I said, in an attempt to inform stakeholders on this issue. There's also a lot of private involvement in both in funding and in education and some of the technologies. Like I said, I think all these things might prove beneficial, and improvement can't come soon enough. We've also utilized partnerships and a lot of incentive programs to make resources available to growers, to establish conservation on the land. We have cooperated with partner NRDs. I'm sure many of you or some of you have heard of the Brazil groundwater management area. That was a collective partnership of 4 NRDs that came together along with the state agency, the Department of Environmental Quality at that time. We came together collectively. It's a voluntary effort to basically leverage resources to hopefully get conservation practices that are beneficial when it comes to water quality, get those adopted on the landscape. We were the first management plan in the nation to get authorization to utilize Section 319 program funds to help pay for some of these incentives that we're able to offer. And it's made a difference. We've been able to get practices on hundreds of acres of land, but as I mentioned earlier, there's still much to do. The coupling of resources from multiple agencies, again, has been critical in helping us get some of the work done that we've been able to do. But like I mentioned, there's still much to do. Expanding on the incentives and partnerships, give a shout out to my colleague in the MAC, Jim Olson. We recently partnered with the NRD to the north of us, the Lewis and Clark NRD. We applied for funding to the Natural Resources Conservation Service to establish a source water protection specialist position in our district. Jim works exclusively on the working lands within our 2 districts to get conservation practices on those lands. Those are locations that he's working in that are basically recharge areas for water supply wells. So that map of those rural communities that I showed you earlier, each of those likely has its own well field that serves its population base, or maybe a rural water system that serves a population base as well. So there's over 100,000 acres of working lands that Jim is working to get practices on. Some of those systems are currently experiencing nitrate issues. Others are not. He's focusing his efforts first on those with the greatest problem, with the greatest need, and then he'll be moving on down the line. But once again, the ability to leverage that federal funding to establish this position was critical in order for us to roll this out. And another shout out to my colleagues it's people on the landscape and working with growers, with constituents. That's critical. The Brazil partnership was very similar to the source water protection law. We have a project coordinator who, you know, their sole responsibility is to work with constituents to inform and educate, make them aware of the opportunities available to them, along with informing them on the magnitude of the problem. Other financial assistance programs that we have, we use some local tax funds. We've been able to leverage some state funds. The state of Nebraska somewhat recently provided assistance to residents in the state. They leveraged ARPA funds from the federal government and made funding available to well owners, private well owners. If they had impaired water quality, they could get assistance to equip their well with a reverse osmosis treatment system. I was able to help my in-laws, who are also residents of the lower Elton NRD. I helped them get their well registered. We got their well tested. It was above the 10 part per million MCL. They had a local firm install a reverse osmosis system in their house. They spent $2,200, and that was paid 100% back by the grant that and the funds that was made available through the state of Nebraska. There's not enough of those kinds of resources available, and with current fiscal situation, both at the federal and state level, unfortunately, I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. We also provide a host of services to residents. We do testing of their domestic wells, whether they're served by a public system or served by their own well. The public systems are monitored and regulated by the state of Nebraska. The privately owned systems that's the private owned well owner's responsibility to know what is the quality of their water. And we felt that it was important for us to establish a program to provide some assistance to them to, first of all, test that water so that they know what's in the water. And then they can make the decision about whether to equip their well with a treatment system if it needs it. We are able to provide some financial assistance out of our own local funds. I'll just back up a little bit. So our agency is a unit of local government here in Nebraska. A big reliable source of revenue for us is property taxes. It's an inelastic form of revenue that we can lean on to provide some of these kinds of resources. That being stated, we take that authority and that ability to raise revenue very seriously. And our board has always been very fiscally conservative when it comes to budgeting. So anyhow, but we are able to do some things like this using local tax funds to provide some benefit to residents. We've also cooperated with folks at the Med Center, and we are currently working with some folks at the University of Nebraska when it comes to collection of water quality samples to help them with their research projects. We're currently working with some folks from UNL on a project that's funded in part by the Nebraska Environmental Trust to do some sampling of wells. That'll be public information once that data is all collected, but once again, with some of these other potential health impacts on the landscape, I think it's important for us to do our part to help researchers obtain data to further their research. And so we've invested heavily and spent a lot of time supporting those kinds of things. So there's been decades of effort, as I mentioned. I've been with the district almost 20 years. I stand on the shoulders of those who were there before me and worked hard on the same kind of challenges. We've been at this for decades, and unfortunately, we haven't necessarily seen the positive results that we certainly would have wished for. That does not mean that there aren't positive results out there. It's just, I think in some cases, it's going to take a long time before we can move the needle when it comes to water quality improvements. And so we will continue to work hard and remain diligent to better understand this resource. And as I mentioned, though, there's been a lot of information obtained. First presenter talked about some of the aerial electromagnetic data that's been acquired in the state. Our district has invested heavily in that. So if I were to show you a map of our district, you'd see lines going all over. That's an efficient method of us collecting data to better manage and understand this resource. The geology that supports the resource in our district is diverse. We hear a lot about the Ogallala Aquifer in Nebraska. Our district has some Ogallala Aquifer on the west edge, but when you move east in our district, it's not the Ogallala Aquifer. We have a lot of diversity in the geology. We have a lot of diversity in soil types. And so all of those things make it really tricky and complicated to manage this resource. But as I mentioned, as a local kid who grew up in that part of the world, I really feel fortunate to be in the role that I am and to be working with the people that I am and to interface with folks like you today. We've got a tough job on our hands, but I am optimistic because the conversations I have with people, I know that people will find the solutions, and it's just they may not come as soon as we would like them to. Now, the thing that I'll mention is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the state of Nebraska. Our governor recently announced the establishment of a task force to take a look at some of the water challenges in our state. It's really been encouraging to hear some of the comments that he's made about his concern about the water quality issues in our state. I'm also fortunate that I'm one of the 20 folks that's on this task force, so I have a seat at the table, along with some colleagues who are charged from the governor is to come up with actionable items that can address some of these problems that we've been dealing with for decades. And he has openly stated that, you know, the time for research is past, the time for studies is past. Let's put some action in place to address these issues. That's very encouraging to me. We haven't heard that from our elected officials in the past. There have been some moves in our state legislature to establish initiatives to help growers better manage the resource, to enable us to cut back on nitrogen use. So, but unfortunately, as I mentioned with the current fiscal crisis, that those resources might become less available. But our commodity organizations, our producer organizations, I think, are also committed to this cause. So all of those things, I think, come together and give me some encouragement as we look towards the future. So thank you.